Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this legendary and lengthy stream series that we're doing here. And yes, we're back at it. We're back covering Major General Richard Hilton's infamous book of the British Empire. And today I am joined by my co-host throughout this series, Connor, for AKA Plotlines. How are you today, Connor?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back at this because I was listening back through the previous one and we it was getting quite spicy to say the least. What Richard Hilton was going into, it was getting quite spicy, and I'm it it's kind of like a cliffhanger ending, like the Empire Strikes Back. We have this like uncertain ending. Like, oh, will we continue the series? Is this as much we can talk about on YouTube? And so I thought we'd leave it for like 4 months gap, and this is your
You mean
this is the return of the the return of the Jedi.
you mean that was on purpose? This has all been planned out?
No, it has not been planned out. I wanted to I did want to do it sooner, um but it's been a long gap, and I'll just explain to people because I haven't I've sort of people have been noted that I haven't been for a period last in the round, I think from October onwards. I haven't been doing many streams on my channel or Iron Dukes, and I explained to Connor off air and a few other people with this, but I was involved with a car accident, and it just meant that I was unable to, for multiple reasons, to stream. But I'm all good now. We're all good now, and we're back at it.
We're
We're
happy
we're
to have
back
you
at
back.
it. Yeah, we're back at it, and we're stronger than ever. So um, so yeah, we are on chapter 10, and chapter 10 is the post-mortem of an empire. Also, Connor, this is quite interesting that we're coming back at this time because now, new year, new start, and also new American imperialistic ambitions.
Yeah.
Yes,
Gotta
it's
get
it.
gotta get Greenland.
We're gonna get Greenland. You're gonna get Canada. You're gonna get Panama, and
Well,
which president?
to be fair, it probably would be better for all society if we had the canal back. But you know.
I don't disagree with the canal, and that was Carter that gave it away, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it's perfect. He died. Now we can get it back.
I think that was a massive. I still don't understand what the logic behind that was. Um,
We built it. It doesn't even make sense. It's not even
no,
like it's
yeah,
not like I mean, I think the French might have financed part of it, but also they failed at making it, and then we had to come in there and actually build it. I mean, we got them their independence just to build it.
yeah,
So you'd think they would at least owe us something.
yeah. Well, America, welcome, welcome to Britain's world.
Yeah, I know
um,
it is a very British situation.
yeah, it's like it's so you come up and all that. Especially for the sewers.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah, yeah. What
too
goes
big.
around?
It's like it's a canal thing. It's a
Yeah, I say what goes around comes around. Am I right?
oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you got that on the horizon, and we're getting into the point now where it is like the what we call in the United Kingdom is like the retreat from the it's usually called the retreat from the empire or the dissolution of the British Empire, and you're looking from the just after Indian independence up until you're looking at this period, it's the end of British rule in places in the Far East like Malaysia and um, Singapore, and then looking at the African colonies as well, and the uh, throwing out South Africa and all these sorts of what you would call decolonization. Um, you're looking at this. This is the sort of time period. So Connor, would you like me to read this one?
Sure. Go ahead.
I'll read this one. So we're starting on chapter 10, post-mortem of an empire. It is of course unusual to hold a post-mortem before the corpse is quite dead. I will remind the listeners that this was written at a time where Britons did still hold possessions in, uh, you know, I think even parts of Africa, the Caribbean, and in certain areas in the Far East.
Definitely Hong
So
Kong, right?
yeah, definitely Hong Kong. Yeah, um, and I'm just trying to think. Possibly there might have been an African colony or two, but I'll need to double check that. Regardless, though. Um, Some readers may consider this chapter a trifle premature because suddenly, after a long period of apparent death, the heart of the empire has given a convulsive flutter. The British government and the Parliament in Westminster have started acting once more, November 1965, as an imperial power after putting up meekly with insults, rebellion, and many a unilateral declaration of independence from self-appointed leaders of people all over the world. Um, so just zoom in a bit. That's better. To enlightened progressives, such as the leaders of all three of Great Britain's major political parties, the provocation now facing them has proved more than they can bear. For this time, the culprit is no mere underdeveloped Afro-Asian community demanding the full privileges of independence within the Commonwealth, including the right to dictate uh, Great Britain's own policies and conduct, without, of course, shouldering any of the burden. This time, Imperial Bumbledom is being defied by a highly civilized community of white settlers and educated Africans who together have fashioned the prosperous land of Rhodesia out of what was only 8 years ago one of the
80
dark
or
oh
mhm,
sorry 80 years ago one of the darkest parts of barbarous Africa. These Rhodesians, white and black, have no desire to boss the old country, as Dr. N. Kramer and others like him are trying to do. These Rhodesians, white and black, simply wish to continue the process of civilizing Rhodesia in that way which they, with local knowledge of their less enlightened people, know to be the best. For although a small proportion of Rhodesian Africans are enlightened and educated men and are sharing in the runnings of Rhodesia, the country also contains large numbers of other Africans who still have a long way to travel on the educational path before they also will be qualified to wield an equal amount of power. This naturally clashes with the doc- doctrinaire ideas of every left wing intellectual, which means, in effect, with every British politician of any note. The cry of the moment of all such people is majority rule and damn the consequences. It matters nothing to them that majority rule has brought chaos and horror in the lands uh, in the Congo and in most other recent emancipated African lands. It matters nothing that the prospect of majority rule is viewed with alarm and despondency in multiracial countries of the Commonwealth, such as Mauritius, Fiji, and British Guinea.
Ga- uh,
Ghana, sorry, Ghana, yeah. This magic expression, majority rule, has become a sacred fetish among self styled progressives of all established parties. To doubt its universal suitability saviors um, almost of political blasphemy, nor do its ardent worshippers even pause to consider it odd that Dr. Uh, Kumar, leader of the African pack that is clamoring for the white Rhodesian's blood, was himself, till recently, the one man ruler of Ghana, where majority rule has been conspicuous for its absence. At long last, when nearly all our other colonies have gone, the British Lion has uttered one of the famous roars which the world never expected to hear again. Here at last is a colony that can be roared at in the good old fashioned way without offending the Afro Asians or the Americans or the mysterious wire pulling organization known as World Opinion. It matters little to Whitehall politicians that Rhodesia is a colony only in name, having been self governing and remarkably efficient so for many years. It matters not at all that Rhodesia would have had their independence within the Commonwealth many years ago had her rulers not agreed to defer this for the wider benefit of the brief lived Federation of Central Africa. Nothing else matters to these timid men, Labour, Conservatives, and Liberal politicians alike, except for the fact that in order to appease the Afro Asians, the American State Department, and the mysterious world opinion, they must swallow their common sense, forget, forget solemn British promises to Rhodesia, and try to bully a community second to none in its loyalties to the Queen and the Commonwealth into a disastrous surrender to to the idol called majority rule. But this show, excuse me, this show of spirit in the dying heart of a dying empire does not mean that there is really any life left. It is like the convulsive twitchings of a chicken after it's been beheaded. It is unfortunately not premature at all to proceed with the post mortem. Nothing in human evolution is immune from change, and it would have been unreasonable to expect the British Empire to exist forever in its Victorian form. At one time, there was, however, a reasonable hope that it would survive and continue its civilizing influence in a modernized form for many hundred years. There were two alternative forms which the 20th century empire might have taken. A. Without loss of territory or people. It was one it was at one time possible to visualize a multiracial federation of self-governing kingdoms, each acknowledging the British monarch as the sovereign of each individual kingdom. Foreign affairs, defense, and trade arrangements of general interest to the whole empire would have been controlled by a central imperial council, while all other matters would have been left in the hands of individual national governments. Within each kingdom, the indigenous race would have retained predominance, while British subjects of other races would have accepted the status of guests without stigma of colour or creed on the part of the local government or the guest. To those who doubt the possibility of this, attention is drawn to the progress already achieved in this direction in the India of 1937. The governor of the Punjab then was Sir Sikandar Hayat, member of the distinguished Punjabi family. British officers and civil servants experienced not the slightest difficulty in accepting him as their superior, by virtue of his appointment as representative of the King Emperor. If evolution had been allowed to continue in this sane and broad-minded manner, the next steps would have been Indian governors in all provinces of the Indian viceroy and an elected Indian government with full powers, subject only to Federation of Defence, Foreign Affairs, etc., a reservation to which Great Britain herself and all the older dominions would have been equally subjected. There was only one obstacle to this course of events, namely the racialism rooted in the minds of a comparatively few of the Western educated Indian intelligentsia. Scenario B: as a smaller but homogeneous federal empire. If the narrow racialism of a few in the non white countries of the empire was doomed to prevail over the broader loyalty of the masses to a great empire, an extremely doubtful outcome had not the racialist minorities been backed by outside disruptive forces, then a second alternative lay before the British Empire. It could have shed all its non-white peoples and territories and transformed itself into a closely knit federation of white nations of the empire, or on similar lines to those outlined above, namely centralized of defense, foreign affairs, and internal trade within the white empire, coupled with complete devolution of all residuary affairs to the individual national governments. In the light of what we now know of disruptive anti-British influences working from without for the disintegration of the empire, it may well be that the first alternative, the ideal of a multiracial monarchy encircling the earth, could never have produced uh, uh, permanency and stability. But there is no reason to doubt that the second alternative, the idea of a federal white monarchy comprising the United Kingdom plus the overseas white nations of the Commonwealth, was a practical proposition. No valid objection can be sustained against it. Distance between the component parts would have presented no um, insuper, um, no insuperable difficulty even in the era before flying, for in those days Britannia effectively ruled the waves, the ocean routes between Great Britain and South Africa and Australia, Australia and New Zealand, as well as the shorter sea routes from Great Britain to Australia through the Suez Canal. All these were strategically secure uh, arteries of the great white empire that could have been formed. Transit from one extremity to the other might at first perhaps have been slow, but so was the transit in the early days from New York to San Francisco, or from the Baltic to Vladivostok. This did not prevent either of these continental landmasses from becoming one compact political entity. At a later period, when long distance air travel brought London within a few hours' journey of Sydney and all the other capitals, the apparently scattered Imperial Federation would, in effect, have been more closely knit in terms of travel hours than many in apparently smaller country who internal communications may have may happen to be bad or difficult. There were, of course, other problems, but none of these were insuperable. Um, There would have been the problem of non-white populations in some of the countries wishing to join the Imperial Federation. There would also have been the problem of two white races with different languages and cultures inhabiting one country, as in the case of Canada or South Africa, or the similar problem of religious strains within one country, as in the case of Ireland. All these problems would be studied fully later when we investigate the great question: is it too late even now to form this federated empire out of the white hardcore of the Victorian Empire? For none of these problems caused earlier dreams of this kind to fail. It was not any geographical or ethnological difficulty that wrecked the past attempts of imperial federations. Early attempts failed through lack of vision and courage on the part of the British statesmen. The nearest approach to a successful launching of this idea came in 1922-23 in the form of imperial preference, a boldly imaginative scheme for a closer union of white nations by means of trading facilities more favorable than those applied to countries outside the empire. Admittedly, the idea of imperial preference was to have been applied to the entire empire, not only to the white nations, but its effect would have been a fusion of the white nations into one economic and strategic entity. An eventual breakaway from the empire of non white nations may or may not have uh, been inevitable. It's a matter of two opinions, neither of which can be proved or disproved today. The essential point is that it was still possible, not so many years ago, to have wheeled the white nations into one great British nation whose solidarity would have been just as real today as those of America or the Soviet Union. The opportunity was lost and the dream faded because British politicians lacked the courage and the vision of great men. They let themselves be frightened by American growls. They let themselves be sidetracked into party political squabbles concerning free trade or protection. The protection which they argued about was merely a term of political jargon for an economic alternative. The protection that loyal subjects of the British Crown all around the world really wanted was the protection of belonging to one great nation, strategically capable of protecting even the most outlying parts and guarding the sea routes between them all. The wider strategic concept was drowned in petty squabbles about lesser and narrower concepts of uh, economic amenities. From the moment when the idea of imperial preference faded, the dream of one federal British nation faded also. The more distant white dominions began to seek ways in looking after themselves, feeling that the mother country had lost interest in them. As British interests as British interest waned, or apparently to wane, American influence seeped in, particularly in Canada. Though sentimental affections for the old country may have not uh, diminished in many overseas homes, a tendency arose for Canada, Australia, and New Zealand to feel that each was now a separate nation, left to its own resources in defense, in trade, and in its relations with countries outside the empire. The drifting apart of overseas dominions was formalized by the Statute of Westminster in 1931. Um, Connor, can I just interject a second?
Yeah, it's yes.
Yeah, so I'll just interject with that. Now, Richard Hilton died in the 70s. I think it was either the late 60s or the 70s.
Yes.
Um, so there was a further Statute of Westminster in the 80s for the white Commonwealth dominions, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. I think it was under Thatcher's rule, and basically that it was the final decoupling of British parliamentary supremacy over the Canadian, Australian, New Zealand parliaments. So this happened about 10 years, probably about 10 years or so, or just over 10 years after his death.
Makes sense.
So that was just to add some uh, context for people going forward. Henceforward, the Old Dominions were officially uh, recognized as a fully independent nations, linked to one another and to United Kingdom only by allegiance to the same monarch and by occasional but very tenuous conferences. The immigration of non-British peoples, Ukrainians, Czechs, uh, Duke, Dukable Russians and others into Canada, and Italians, Spaniards, and other Mediterranean peoples into Queensland, produced new generations of Canadians or Australians who were not united by ancestral links to Great Britain. Enough has been said to show that the late British Empire did not die simply of old age or from any other natural causes. It was deliberately killed. The verdict must be murder by some persons well known. um, those primarily responsible were foreign enemies of the British Empire. Here we need waste no time to specify these enemies or assert their relative share in the murder. Were Afro-Asians demagogues foremost in plotting imperial downfall, or were international finances the real villains? Was the State Department, Washington, in its many underhand blows against British interests, operating on behalf of the American people, or was that department working for some mysterious group of wire pullers who have been using American government and all its resources merely as a tool in some vast scheme for world domination? Oh, what do you think, Connor? Do you think it was the Afro Asians, or do you think it was this mysterious group using the American people and the American government to get what they want?
I will no comment.
Yeah, people in chat, either it is option A, it's the Afro Asians who came to this radical conclusion themselves to bring down the empire, or it's option B, the mysterious wire pulling figures behind the scenes who control the State Department and American foreign policy even to this day. So yeah, put it in chat what you think, A or B. All right, we shall continue. Uh, some think, excuse me, some think one thing and the other, and some other. It really matters not at all to us as students of British weakness and strength which of these foreign policymakers played the leading anti-British part. For after all, they are all foreigners. There was no moral obligation on them to do favour British interests, nor any moral stigma in striking blows against the British Empire. Every powerful organisation has enemies. We ought to have experienced all sorts of troubles from foreign enemies and guard ourselves against it, if by the grace of God Great Britain rises to true greatness again. We must always expect similar blows and plots from foreign enemies. Such things are an inevitable part of the jostle of human communities, but anti British acts by people of our own nation are unnatural, horrible, and quite im- impalatable with greatness in a nation. Without this poison within our system, our foreign enemies could have achieved little or nothing. This decomposition must be rooted out before Great Britain can be restored to health. For though the empire in its former pattern is dead beyond recall, the British nation is very far from dead. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 10. So, Connor, thoughts on this chapter?
Well, it's a lot, to be honest. The but also seems somewhat, distracted between two different things. Being the sort of the focus on sort of Rhodesia and its abandonment, and the what if story. What were the options if the empire were to have continued? Um, yeah, so I don't know. It's just a lot going on in this chapter. What do you think?
It's funny because it's one of his. It's quite a short chapter compared to the other chapters that we've covered in the book. It's not. It's only a couple of pages, so there is compared to some of the early ones, where he was going through the history of the rule, the empire in India and everything. This is a very short chapter, the post-mortem chapter, and I think one thing that's quite interesting is he sort of and this sort of stands out, and people like Iron Duke and maybe a few Australians in chat will um, remember that we talked about this on numerous occasions. If you look at this time, this was what 1965. He was writing the writing in. So at this time, Canada was changing its national flag from the red ensign, so it was the small Union Jack in the top left hand corner, and the old the three maple leaves and Quebecan symbol, to the Canadian flag that we know today. And there was many opposition to this, and at the time, I think it was majority. With I don't. There would seem to be a sizable percentage who were against this, and this was Trudeau's stepfather, who did this. Pierre Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau was involved with this campaign. Many viewed it at the time, and looking back now, as an attempt to separate the Canadian, that you know the actual identity, the national identity of what it is to be a Canadian. And Richard Hilton's mind, the idea of being a Canadian is being British, it's being English, and probably the at one point in America's very early history, America, even by its founding fathers, was viewed as an English nation. Um, you didn't have any of this propositional stuff that we hear today. And so a lot of the times I like to do these tweets, and I say, well, Canada is British, Australia is British, New Zealand is British, because that's how, I mean, that's fundamentally where it is, because these things don't come out of thin air. These nations aren't recently constructed nations, that they have a history and heritage and baggage, or whatever you like to call it. And he does highlight that there is that sort of connection, and but also he highlights the problem that at his time, and we have that legacy today in Canada and Australia and such, where you have immigration from other parts of Europe, um, and parts of the Middle East, who didn't come from British imperial territories or Britain, who have settled in Canada and Australia, and so they have no connection. They have no connection to the place. They may, they'll they accept themselves as being Australian, but they have no connection to Britain. And that creates different levels of tension. And if you look at Canada of 1960, 1960 Canada to Canada of today, I would say, and then this is what Richard Hill was getting at, that Canada has become so Americanized that it might as well be part of America now, because really, what difference is it? Is it on a sort of you know social level? It is the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's I one of the things this is talking about, or Richard Hilton brings up, is just something that had always sort of baffled me from when I was younger and very ignorant about politics and history and stuff like that, is why like places like Canada, why places like Australia and New Zealand aren't already just basically united united under one banner, basically. That because there was no revolution, at least not not the murderous kind. There was something, this internal destruction that really comes about, in my opinion, once you basically accept democracy. This whole argument about Rhodesia, whether or not it should accept majority rule, is predicated on the belief that in Britain the majority should rule there as well.
Well, exactly, and with Rhodesia's case again, this is his writing before. You would then have the hostility by the British state with South Africa, chucking South Africa out of the Commonwealth. Same, similar fate with Rhodesia, and being treated as these sort of rogue states. I mean, in many ways they got the same treatment as Franco in Spain. You're not sort of recognizing the legitimacy, and sort of demanding for you know majority rule, as you say, your majority rule in a country which is incredibly, these countries are incredibly tribalistic, and on a multi-ethnic level. So um, majority rule, it doesn't mean anything in that context. And of course, Rhodesia would have to fight bush wars. I mean, Iron Duke knows very well about that. He was involved in South Africa with that when he was a younger chap. So he knows, and there have been people I think on his channel who've talked about that. And you had communist backed rebels, you had American backed. Yeah, they were sort of, in some cases, backed by both of the same groups, and who really threw the kitchen sink at Rhodesia. And Rhodesia managed to hold their own. They were surrounded, because it's a landlocked country. They were surrounded by hostile power, hostile organization, hostile groups. Um, and as you said, it was the democratic side that let them down. They it was the weakness from within, from the statesman, that sort of allowed it to crumble.
It
Um,
it reminds me very much of this element that takes place in the show Yes Minister, or Yes Prime Minister, where the Foreign Office is always like it. Their policy is always to basically chuck out any, more or less any non-communist, or non, um, yeah, basically non-communist favored government, in exchange for the GDP or something like that.
yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah.
that what,
That
something
yeah,
real? Is that sort of what Richard Hilton's
yeah.
saying?
The running joke in Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister is that they favour a communist. There's the episode where communist guerrillas are set to take control of this fictional overseas British territory, and they're actually sort of like, the civil servants behind the scenes are sort of like are basically allowing it to happen, and they want to sort of hide it from the minister, um and they're doing it for some large global reason.
I thought they
uh
wanted to build an airport.
yeah, something like that. It's something of some sort of like gig man economy reason. um and you also have in that, the civil service, being quite sort of backing of a lot Soviet aligned and communist aligned. They're incredibly anti-American and anti-Zionist. And that's also in one of the episodes they joke about, because Jim Hacker wants to cozy up to the Americans, he has to be he basically orders his um, I think it's the foreign secretary or sort of one of the representatives at the UN to vote in favour of a motion with Israel. But because he's the part of the Foreign Office, they vote against, because that's the running gag, that the Foreign Office is incredibly pro-Arab and anti-Zionist, and that there is an element of truth to that. That there at the time, um, large parts of the British political establishment were, in the Foreign Office at least, were quite pro-Arab. They were anti-American. There was some of it because maybe they were communists. Some of it was bitter vendettas against the Suez stuff, because that did screw over a few people, not just politicians, but in the civil service as well. So there was multiple reasons why that sort of thing. I mean, the British alignment with the Zionists didn't really occur until Margaret Thatcher, and that was when you saw this alignment with America and Britain and Europe on like being very pro-Zionist against the uh Islamists.
Wasn't Israel on the side of the British during the Suez Crisis? Or if I'm
Y- Yeah.
mistaken.
Ye- yeah, now it was Britain, France, and Israel, but Israel was a quiet partner. From my understanding from the Adam Curtis documentary, they were a quiet one because they realized that they would also be uh lying and to America, and they didn't want to at that moment in time they didn't want it uh they didn't want to feel like they didn't want to, at that moment in time, they didn't want to like screw over America, basically, so they wanted to be kept far away. But at the because this was a British sort of led expedition, the anger from the Americans, particularly uh Truman, was levied against Britain, because we did the gunboat diplomacy, and that was what wound him up. And that was when the Soviet Union and America sort of tag teamed. I believe in that instance, Israel just sort of naturally backed out. France also, got a bit of a bollocking by the Americans. So yeah, um, I think that's what did it. I think the yeah that and going back to the Adam Curtis documentary, which this is sort of I like to refer back to. A lot of the reason why the civil servants give for not pushing to go into Vietnam with the Americans was just purely out of purely out of just revenge for that betrayal. That was the mindset at the time. Um,
Yeah. I don't really think the um was it the in federation of all the non-white colonies basically would have worked, that Richard Hilton proposes or sets forward, only because it basically, in some ways, it sounds like a more dysfunctional version of Austria-Hungary.
um,
I don't know if
I
that
th- I
agree with
think a
that.
federal I think I agree, but I think what maybe Richard Hilton, I don't know if this I because I've just been going back over it, and I can't really tell if he means the British Empire as it was in 1930, the interwar period, or if he's referring to the height of the British Empire under the Victorian period. I think a federation with the mechanisms and the people, the type of people around in the Victorian period probably would have worked. It would have been just like one massive empire, but with like imperial provinces. It may have worked. Um, but I think given the type of managerialism that existed in the interwar period, I agree. I don't think it would have worked. And I think what probably would have happened is you would have just had, as he stated, with the invention of the aircraft, it would have made it easier for just mass movements of people and he doesn't account for what the people that you had the emerging sort of capitalists, the new money men of the post-war period, who wanted um, these non-white imperial citizens, if you will, from the Indian subcontinent and others to come to UK to work in
Cheap labor.
um, yeah, in the mill towns that have been mentioned in the news in this country recently, because you know Rochdale, Rotherham, Oldham, um, those areas that have been mentioned by in the news that Elon Musk's been tweeting with the Pakistani rape gangs. Um, all of those are the old mill towns, all of them, the textile mills, which because that was a big part of the Indian British economy in parts of northern India was the textile industry, and so um, those people arrived in the UK because of capitalist interest, if you will, which he doesn't really take account of at that time. So I don't think it would have worked. No, no, I don't think it would have worked.
Yeah. The question about the right, whether Americans were fighting the British to secure the rights of Englishmen, is, I think, preposterous, given the fact that the so-called rights that Americans were asking for were basically liberal ideas, not really traditional English beliefs, I would say. I don't know if you agree with that, AI.
Um, Yeah, I need to do like a bit of a read into the Sons of Liberty organization, the sort of and the various other American revolutionary patriot organizations, because I I have a theory, but I don't want to delve too much into that.
Well, do you think
Uh
King George was trampling on the colonies?
I do not because uh one thing I've one thing I've noted with the um and you'll hear many sort of patriots, they'll say, "Ah, the forcible the hike in taxation." It's like, well, North America was embroiled in the 7 Years' War. There was you know
We had a
the
debt to pay, basically.
well, yeah, because the 13 colonies were effectively the front line between the French in French Canada and their native Indian allies, um, which was numerous. You had the Cherokee in the south, who weren't allies with the French per se, but they were still would enter colonial territory, and so there needed to be that level of protection for the colonists. And when I've done when I did like a for a stream, I did a little research. And I noted that the course of action for the Patriots was always, as I sort of stated at the time, was like BLM level violence, where they would go from place to place, attack Tories, loyalists, like like it'd be politicians, tax collectors, and they even just do straight up public executions of them in a very which would resemble the French Revolutionary style. And I believe a lot of the French Revolution of its methods of terror was actually born out of attacks on Tories in places like Philadelphia. There's a few notable ones, but yeah, I maybe we could do a stream on that at some point in the future.
Maybe that would be good. That would be a good stream. Um, well, I actually have to get going. Thank you for having me on, AI. Um, I
No,
look forward to our next episode.
yeah, no, that's great. The next episode, chapter 11, is power politics in the nuclear age. So that should be quite an interesting one. And we've come far from the Napoleonic era, haven't we, Connor?
Yes, we have.
I know I'm sort of missing. I'm reminiscing of those early streams.
Well, take care, everyone. Bye.
Take care, Connor. Um, yeah. So I'll head off now. I'll just see who. Anyone read A Fighting Retreat, the British Empire, 1947 to 97? It covers a lot of the conflicts around the English European empires, dissolution. I left a lot of hilarious anecdotes too. I have not. I have not read that. I that sounds quite interesting. I will look that up. I remember there was a book on the British Empire, which was just stated the British Empire, 1497 to 1997. Um, I don't know why they chose. I think maybe because they wanted like a 300-400 years sort of connection, bang on the date with the handover of Hong Kong, but that covered the you know the history and the decline of it as well. But it didn't really cover if I remember correctly, the decline was kind of like just uh the official line. There wasn't anything of anything deep about it. It was magically all at once everyone wanted to leave, that sort of thing. Aaron Hook. The level of terror in the American Revolution was such that more loyalists left the 30 colonies than Frenchmen who left France during their revolution. Yeah, true. Um, I I think it was de Gobineau who said that there was like a racial element of the French Revolution as well, and I think that some of the forces. One of my hypotheses with the American Revolution is that it was forwarded by. And I am, the 13 colonies were like 95%, Protestant, overwhelmingly English or British, including, the British Isles and what have you. But I do think there was, um, and you could look at the Puritans, but I do think there was like a early form of, what you called oikophobia, you know, of this outward preference, globalized mind. They wanted the French involved, they wanted these groups and this group involved. They would have, Prussian advisors, and I think there was some pretty shady characters involved with the Patriot movement and the Sons of Liberty, and you know, um, I don't know if those particular revolutionary, those figures. From my understanding, later on, looking at the 1812 war, that their sort of anti-British sentiment was sort of drowned out by those in New England. There was quite sympathy with Britain, in Napoleonic conflict and in the 1812 conflict. So, uh, and especially in the South, in Virginia and the Carolinas and Georgia, there was you uh, there was a bit of more favourable attitude towards Britain. So it's a very strange thing. It's a strange thing. Maybe this is like the earliest form of liberal psyop that we've in human history. That this was people were motivated, because I think the sort of average patriot was probably motivated for they were given this simplistic villain. you know these figures, like great figures of the 7 Years' War, like George Washington, Charles Lee, all these figures, these great figures are heroes, and then you got this evil king over there, elsewhere out of sight and mind is the evil king, and that got the emotions getting, and to be honest, there was. that you could say that there was on a domestic level, um, the taxes did impact because, of course, it would. There was a level of impact on the stamp duty, preventing westward expansion, alliance with the natives. This, it was unpopular, but there was organization behind it. Anyway, this is a topic for another day and another stream. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Um, and I will probably do another episode of this, not next week, but the following week. But we'll see how we do. Um, we'll see how this goes. It was quite a short chapter, this one. So anyway, everyone, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next time.